The city was a lonely place these days. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, and all the men had suddenly lost interest in women. Jane had been single for a while, but now it seemed like there was no hope for her. She sat at her desk, scrolling through her social media feeds, and all she could see were posts from her female friends, all of them complaining about how hard it was to find a man these days. Jane's phone rang, and she picked it up. It was her best friend, Samantha. "Hey, have you noticed anything weird lately?" Samantha asked. "You mean other than the fact that all the men in the city have disappeared?" Jane replied, only half joking. "Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I heard from a friend of a friend that there's some kind of illness going around that's making men lose interest in women. Have you heard anything like that?" Jane shook her head, but the thought of a mysterious illness spreading through the city sent a shiver down her spine. As the weeks went by, the rumors of the illness grew more and more persistent. Men were dropping out of the dating scene in droves, leaving women feeling rejected and confused. The city was becoming a place of isolation and despair, with no clear explanation for what was happening. Jane had started to notice something else, too. The few men who were still around seemed different somehow. They were quieter, more withdrawn. They kept to themselves, avoiding eye contact and conversation. It was as if they were under some kind of spell. One night, as Jane was walking home from work, she saw a group of men gathered on the corner, all of them staring blankly ahead. She tried to ignore them and keep walking, but one of the men stepped in front of her. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Do you have a moment to spare?" Jane looked into his eyes, but they were empty, as if he were looking right through her. She felt a chill run down her spine, and she quickly shook her head and walked away. Jane's curiosity about the mysterious illness grew, and she began to do some research of her own. She scoured the internet for information, but she found nothing but rumors and hearsay. There was no official word from the government or medical community, and the silence only fueled her suspicions. One day, Jane received an anonymous email with a link to a website. The site was dedicated to uncovering the truth about the illness, and it contained a wealth of information that Jane had never seen before. According to the site, the illness was not a natural phenomenon, but the result of a sinister plot by a shadowy organization that sought to control the male population. Jane was skeptical at first, but as she read more and more about the organization's methods and goals, she began to believe that there was something to this theory. She knew she had to do something to stop them, but she had no idea where to start. Jane's investigations led her to a group of women who were also concerned about the disappearance of men. They called themselves the Simp Hunters, and they were determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. At first, Jane was skeptical of the group's methods. They were aggressive and confrontational, and they seemed to be more interested in revenge than in finding a solution. But as she got to know the members of the group, she began to see that they were driven by a sense of desperation and fear. They had all been affected by the illness. The Simp Hunters had a plan. They believed that the key to stopping the organization was to infiltrate it from the inside. They had identified a man who they believed was a member of the organization, and they had convinced him to let them into their headquarters. Jane was nervous as she walked into the building, but she tried to keep her cool. She was wearing a wire, and the other members of the group were monitoring her every move. The man led her through a maze of corridors and secret doors, and finally they arrived at a large room filled with computers and high-tech equipment. There were several men and women in the room, all of them dressed in black and looking very serious. "Welcome to our headquarters," the man said, gesturing around the room. "We have been watching you, Jane. We know what you are trying to do, and we will not let you interfere with our plans." Jane felt a lump in her throat, but she tried to stay calm. She knew that the other members of the group were listening in, and she hoped that they would be able to intervene if things got out of hand. As the man continued to talk, Jane tried to gather as much information as she could. She learned that the organization had developed a virus that could be transmitted through the air, causing men to lose interest in women. They had already released the virus in several cities, and they planned to release it worldwide in the coming weeks. Jane knew that she had to act fast. She had to find a way to stop the organization before it was too late. Over the next few days, Jane worked with the Simp Hunters to come up with a plan. They decided that the only way to stop the organization was to destroy their headquarters and their equipment. It was a risky plan, but it was their only hope. They spent weeks planning and preparing for the operation. They scouted the building, identified the best points of entry and exit, and practiced their tactics. They were determined to succeed, no matter what the cost. The night of the operation arrived, and Jane and the Simp Hunters were ready. They wore black clothing and carried weapons, ready to take on whatever stood in their way. As they entered the building, alarms started blaring and lights began flashing. The members of the organization were alerted to their presence, and they came running. The Simp hunters fought bravely, taking down the members of the organization one by one. Jane felt a rush of adrenaline as she fired her weapon, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, they reached the main control room, where the virus was being manufactured. They destroyed the equipment, and the virus was neutralized. Jane and the Simp hunters were hailed as heroes. The organization was disbanded, and the members were brought to justice. But the damage had already been done. The virus had already been released in several cities, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done to relationships and families. Jane was left with a sense of sadness and regret. She had fought to stop the organization, but she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. She knew that she had to find a way to rebuild what had been lost, but she also knew that it would be a long and difficult journey.